What would you do if the person you trusted the most was slowly destroying your entire world right in front of you and you had no idea? And what if I told you that in today's story, the truth didn't wait for confession, didn't wait for confrontation? It came out when there was no way to turn back. Stay with me until the end, because what happens here isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a series of events that leave no one in this story alive. Not even the person who thought they were in control. Before we go any deeper, understand this. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about trust built over years, love tested under pressure, and how a hidden truth can destroy an entire life in moments. He believed he had it all. A stable home, a woman he loved deeply, and most importantly, a baby on the way. Something they had both prayed for, waited for, and fought to have. After years of disappointment and hope, they were finally just weeks away from becoming parents. On the outside they seemed perfect. The kind of couple people admired. The kind of love story others wished for. But sometimes the most perfect-looking stories hide deep cracks. And in this story, those cracks had already begun to form in ways he couldn't yet understand. Small changes at first. Things you could easily overlook. Little distance. Change in tone. Moments where she seemed to be there, but wasn't really there. At that moment, he told himself it was just the tension. Pregnancy changes everything, right? But deep down something didn't feel right. And as the day their baby was born drew closer, that feeling would only grow stronger. Until one moment changed everything. If you watch until the end, you'll see how a hidden truth exposed the life of trust, and how karma has a way of reaching out to you exactly when it's needed most, even when no one is ready for it. He was a man who believed in patience, loyalty, and building life slowly, step by step. 4 years he worked long hours, saved money, and tried to build a home where love felt safe. And with him was his wife, the woman he once called his best friend, his companion, his peace. She was 8 months pregnant now. And every time he looked at her, he felt a quiet pride. Because it hadn't been an easy journey for them. It had taken years of disappointment, failed hopes, and painful waiting before they finally saw those 2 pink lines. There were nights when they cried together, wondering if they would ever be parents. There were days when they almost gave up. But somehow they didn't. And now, they were so close. Their home seemed peaceful from the outside. Soft conversations at dinner. Soft smiles in the morning. Family members checking in with excitement. Everyone around them thought they were the definition of a perfect couple. Stable, loving, and finally blessed with a child they had always wanted. He often imagined the moment he would hold his child for the first time. He even talked to the unborn child at night, placing his hand on its belly, believing that he was already forming a bond that nothing could break. But life has a strange way of hiding the truth behind comfort. Because perfection is rarely as perfect as it seems. And in the quiet corners of their seemingly beautiful life, something was already changing. Something small, almost invisible at first, but powerful enough to destroy everything they had built together. Their story wasn't always easy, but it was real. They met years ago, when life was still uncertain and they were both trying to figure things out. There were no fancy dates, no perfect Instagram moments. Just simple conversations, shared struggles, and a growing connection that felt honest. Over time that connection grew deeper. They both believed that something would last. When they decided to get married, it wasn't that everything was perfect. It was because they had already seen each other at their worst and still chose to stay. He worked hard for everything he had. The long shifts, the extra jobs, the weekend getaways with friends. It was all for one reason: to build a stable future for the two of them. He wasn't rich, but he was consistent. And in her mind that mattered more than anything else. She appreciated him. At least that's what he always said he did. She would wait for him, ready for dinner, greet him with a tired smile, and talk about their future as if it were written in stone. A small house, a happy family, and the child they both dreamed of having one day. And then, after years of waiting, that dream finally began to come true. The pregnancy changed everything. Suddenly their lives had a new purpose. Every appointment, every scan, every heartbeat became a moment they shared together. He never missed a checkup. He would hold her hand in the waiting room and ask questions, smiling like a child himself every time he saw the baby on the screen. Even their family noticed the change. Friends would say they seemed stronger than ever, more complete, more united. There was celebration all around them, baby showers being planned, advice being given, laughter being exchanged. From the outside it seemed like everything fell into place. A man who sacrificed everything for his family. A woman holding her long-awaited child. A love story that had finally reached its happy chapter. But what no one could see was that not every smile was honest. Because behind closed doors, small details began to be transmitted. Moments that were not appropriate. Silences that lasted for a while. And a distance that slowly began to grow between two people who once shared everything. First it was easy to ignore. But soon it would be impossible to pretend that it was no longer there. Didn't all come together at once. At first it was just the little things that could easily be understood. She started spending more time on her phone. Not openly, not visibly, but quietly. Removing the screen when he walked in, locking it faster than before, leaving the room to take specific calls. Whenever he asked, she would smile and say it was just family, just friends, just the pregnancy group chat. And he believed him. Because when you love someone deeply, your brain gets good at protecting them, even from your own doubts. But then the emotional distance set in. She wasn't the same anymore. Conversations that had once felt heated began to feel short. His jokes didn't make her laugh the same way. Even simple moments at dinner began to feel silent. Like something invisible was sitting between them. Still he told himself it was just the stress of pregnancy. Hormones. Fatigue. Everyone said pregnancy changes a woman. So instead of asking more questions he tried harder. He brought her food, helped her rest, adjusted his schedule to be more present. But the gap didn't close. Slowly grew. Then came the final moments of the night. He would wake up sometimes and find that she wasn't with him. At first he thought she was going to the bathroom, maybe struggling to sleep. But then he started to see patterns. The phone glowing in the dark. The whispered conversation she would cut off the moment she sensed movement. Messages arriving at hours that didn't feel normal. One night he asked softly, half asleep, "Who have you been talking to so late?" He didn't even look at her properly. "Just my cousin," he said quickly. "She's going through something." And that was it. No explanation. No detail. Just enough to end the conversation. Still, something inside him began to shift. Because the excuses didn't always line up. Sometimes she said she was tired, but her phone had been fully charged and active all night. Sometimes she said she was resting, but she seemed emotionally distant even when she was sitting right next to him. Little inconsistencies. Little gaps in her story. Things most people ignore. But don't completely forget. And yet, he kept choosing to believe her. Not because it all made sense, but because it felt too painful to consider the alternative. It was a moment he had almost overlooked. Small detail. The kind that wouldn't matter. Unless something inside you was already starting to break. One evening, as he was walking through the bedroom, he noticed that his phone was on again. But this time it wasn't there. The phone had been left face down on the bed. Something he had never done before. Normally, she guarded it carefully, always keeping it close, even in the bathroom. He paused. At first, he told himself to go. To respect her privacy. To trust her like he always did. But this time something felt different. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quietly, uncomfortably wrong. And then it did. A notification flashed for just a second before disappearing. Name. Not a family member. Not a friend he recognized. Just a name that didn't belong in their world. His heart slowed. He didn't touch the phone right away. He just stood there staring at it, as if waiting for it to make sense on its own. But it didn't. The feeling he'd been pushing away for weeks suddenly returned. But this time, it wasn't just a feeling anymore. Had a shape. Direction. After that night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying that moment in his mind. Name. timing, the way she was acting. Everything started to connect in a way he didn't want. And for the first time, he didn't ask her directly. Instead, he watched. The next day he paid attention to everything. Her movements, her phone habits, the way she reacted to messages. And slowly, painfully, the pattern became clear. There was the conversation she'd been hiding. Time she couldn't account for. Moments where his attention completely disappeared from her, even when she was physically present. And then came the final push. A preview of a message appeared while she was in the shower. Just long enough for her to read a few words. Words that weren't about marriage. Words that weren't part of their story. Words that shattered the illusion she'd held onto for months. Her hands went cold. Because in that moment, everything she'd believed about her life, about him, about their future, collapsed. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once. He didn't explode right away. That was the weird part. He just stood there, staring at the messages he'd received, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing clearly. The names, the late-night conversations, the hidden plans, everything created a picture he never wanted to understand. And yet, it was undeniable. She was talking to someone else. Not just by chance. Not just harmlessly. But in a way that crossed every line he thought existed in their marriage. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, everything inside him felt heavy. He looked at her differently now. Not with anger at first, but with disbelief. As if he'd been waiting for her to explain to him in a way that would make everything instantly okay. But deep down, he already knew there was no simple explanation. He showed her the phone. That was it. No yelling. No accusations. Just silence and the flickering screen between them. For a moment she froze. Her face changed instantly. The calm, tired expression she'd always worn during her pregnancy was replaced by panic. And in that moment the truth stopped hiding. She tried to speak, but her words weren't coming out clearly. First denial. Then confusion. Then excuses that no longer connected to anything. Each sentence made her worse, not better. And then, reality slipped away in pieces. Too much emotion. Too much pressure. Too many lies held together for too long. There was someone else. Someone she'd been talking to for too long. Someone who made her feel something. Someone who had convinced herself that she was only temporary and harmless. Until it wasn't. The room fell silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't peace. It was a fall. He felt something break inside him. Not just betrayal, but confusion, grief, and love all clashing. Because this wasn't just his wife. This was the woman he had built his entire life around. The mother of his unborn child. The person he trusted more than anyone in the world. And now she was standing in front of him, admitting that she was living a double life. He wanted to scream. He wanted to leave. He wanted answers that would somehow make it less real. But another thought kept pulling him back. Baby. 8 months pregnant. Close to delivery. Any stress could jeopardize everything. The doctors had already warned him about the complications of the pregnancy. So now he was caught up in something even more painful than anger. Because part of him was devastated. But another part still feared what this trauma might do to him and the baby. Love and betrayal were sitting in the same room with him. And in the next few hours didn't feel real. It was like the moment the truth came out, the entire house changed its atmosphere. No one was yelling at first, but the silence was heavier than any argument could have been. She sat there, avoiding his eyes, while he stayed frozen between anger and disbelief, trying to process how quickly everything had fallen apart. But secrets don't stay contained for long. By the next morning, things started to spread. At first, it was a family member who noticed something was off. Then another. Then questions began. Why was she crying? Why was he so quiet? Why wasn't he reacting like himself? And slowly pressure built. When families get involved in situations like this, emotions don't stay controlled. Words get sharper. Sides start forming. People demand answers that no one is ready to give in a calm way. Her family tried to protect her at first. They said pregnancy makes people emotional, confused, unstable. They asked him to be patient, to think about the baby, to not take any rushed decisions. But his family had already seen enough. They weren't just hearing rumors anymore. They were seeing proof, fragments of truth that couldn't be ignored. Screenshots, messages, inconsistencies in her explanations that kept changing every time someone asked again. And what hurt him the most wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was how quickly people around them stopped seeing them as a couple, and started seeing them as a problem that needed to be solved. Then came the second layer of truth. The affair partner wasn't just some random mistake in passing. There was a history there. Conversations that had been going on longer than he realized. Emotional dependency that had slowly replaced boundaries. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a pattern she had hidden carefully while continuing to act like everything at home was normal. When this came out, the emotional confrontation reached a new level. He finally spoke properly after days of silence. Not out of rage but exhaustion. His voice was calm but broken. He asked her why. Not just why she cheated, but why she continued building a future with him while doing it. Why she let him talk to the unborn child every night. Why she let him believe in a version of life that wasn't fully real. She didn't have a strong answer. And that silence said more than anything she could have said. Meanwhile, pressure from both families turned the situation into something unavoidable. Everyone was watching. Everyone was reacting. Every decision now carried weight. Not just emotionally but socially. And in the middle of all this chaos, something strange started happening. Life itself began to respond. Appointments, stress, emotional strain. Everything started affecting her pregnancy more noticeably. Doctors warned again about stress levels. Every argument, every confrontation, every breakdown wasn't just between two people anymore. It was now tied to something much more fragile. And in that tension, people started to realize something uncomfortable. This wasn't just a story of betrayal anymore. It was becoming a story of consequences that no one could fully control. And karma that was unfolding in real time. There of them was letting go. The final confrontation did not happen quietly. It came after a day of stress, sleepless nights, and conversations that kept coming back to the same broken point. Everyone was tired, but no one could stay away from it anymore. Both families were present that day. Not because they had planned the meeting, but because things had reached a point where it was no longer possible to avoid it. The air in the room felt heavy, as if everyone already knew that this would be the moment when everything would completely fall apart, or somehow end. She sat to one side, seemingly fragile, overwhelmed with tension and emotion. He sat across from her, calm on the outside, but completely drained on the inside. Between them was everything they had built and everything they had destroyed. First no one spoke. Then the questions began again. This time faster, more direct, leaving no room for vague answers or emotional excuses. People demanded the whole truth, not bits and pieces. And this time there was no place to hide. She broke. Not dramatically at first, but in small cracks. The hesitation in her voice, the tears she couldn't control, and finally, the words she had been avoiding all along. She admitted it all. The emotional attachment. The secrecy. The messages. The timeline that was longer than anyone had first believed. But then what happened changed the tone of the entire room. Because the affair hadn't just been exposed. It had been revealed that the other person had been hiding things too. Promises he never intended to keep. A version of the truth he had sold her that wasn't real. She wasn't the only one who had been emotionally misled. And suddenly, the situation wasn't as simple as people had first thought. It didn't erase his responsibility. But it revealed how deeply she was pulled into something unstable on both sides. The room fell silent again. And in that silence something unexpected happened. Her body buckled under the pressure. She collapsed emotionally and physically at once, overcome by tension, fear, and exhaustion. Panic immediately filled the room. Attention shifted from confrontation to urgency. Calls were made. People rushed. The reality of the pregnancy, already fragile for days, suddenly became the only thing that mattered. In the chaos, he stood still for a moment most of all. Not because he didn't care, but because he was watching everything he once believed unfold in real time, while at the same time fearing the worst. This was no longer just a hoax. These were the consequences, emotional, social, and physical, colliding in a way that no one could control anymore. And as she was rushed to get medical attention, one sentence resonated in the minds of everyone who watched it all unfold. Justice doesn't always wait for the end of the story. Sometimes, it arrives before the baby is even born. After everything that happened, one thing became painfully clear. Betrayal doesn't just break trust in a moment. It destroys something that is almost impossible to rebuild again. Even if apologies are said, even if explanations are given, something changes forever. Because trust is not just about believing words. It is about feeling safe with someone. And once that safety is gone, love starts to feel different. He could still care. He could still worry. But he could never go back to believing in the same way again. And maybe that is the hardest part of stories like this. Not the argument, not the discovery, but the silence that comes after, when everything you thought was real now feels uncertain. This story also shows something else. Karma doesn't always arrive in the way people expect. It is not always dramatic or instant. Sometimes it builds slowly through consequences, choices, and timing that no one can control. What was hidden eventually comes forward. What was avoided eventually demands attention. And what was ignored eventually becomes unavoidable. But karma is not just about punishment. It is about truth surfacing when it can no longer be buried. And in that truth, everyone is forced to face what they created with their decisions. Another lesson here is how important honesty is. Not just at the beginning of something but throughout it. Because timing doesn't erase responsibility. Waiting until the right moment to be honest often causes more damage than speaking truth early, even when it is uncomfortable. Silence may feel safer in the moment, but it often becomes the most dangerous choice later. In the end, what stays with people is not just what happened, but what could have been prevented if truth had been chosen sooner. And that is the reflection this story leaves behind. Because every action has weight, and every hidden truth eventually finds its way into the light. And now the question that this story leaves behind is not about what they did, but what you would have done in his place. If you discovered the truth at the worst possible moment, when emotions are high, trust is already broken, and a child is on the way, what would your next step have been? Would you stay for the sake of the baby and try to rebuild something from the ruins? Or would you walk away, even if it meant carrying that pain for the rest of your life? There is no easy answer here, and that's exactly why this story hits so hard. I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Drop your opinion in the comments because every person sees this situation differently, and sometimes the most honest answers come from people who have lived through something similar. And if you enjoy deep, emotional, real-life betrayal stories like this, stories that make you think, feel, and question choices people make, then consider subscribing. The next story might make you see relationships in a completely different way. If this story has made you reflect even a little, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life emotional stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments, I read them all, and let me know what you would have done in my place.